I'll get to the New York Times, among other things. But first, I've asked a friend of mine, Jasser, to come on the program. He, by the way, is a man of color, and he is Muslim. And he's the president of the Islamic Forum for Democracy. Zudi, how are you?
Great. It's great to be with you, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. How many times have you been to Israel?
Been there 3 times. First time in 2007, then in 13, and then again just a year and a half ago.
Did you have difficulty getting into Israel?
Not at all. Not at all. Beautiful trips. Got to go to Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa, and got to really see how normal of a country it is and how misrepresented it is by the media, and how much of it reminded me of America, and got to meet 1 out of 6 people there are Arabs like myself who live freely as Israelis, and got to learn a lot about the country, and went there with an open mind. And you see these 2 congresswomen exploiting every opportunity they can. When people visit, you can get both sides of it, whatever story you want, and if you go there with an open American heart, you'll realize that it is truly our greatest ally.
Have any of the major media outlets contacted you about any of this? New York Times,
Fox,
Washington Post?
Oh, no, not at all.
How about CNN, MSNBC?
No.
NBC, CBS, ABC?
Doesn't
Associated Press?
Nope.
No, they're not going to contact you, are they?
Nope, and if they Googled Muslim Israel, and all they need to do is do some real journalism, we would be at the top of most of their searches, because this has been an issue that we've been trying to speak up, as you know, about for since 9/11, that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is exploited by Islamists. Hamas is a terror organization that dominates our community, and as you know, the pushback I get from a lot of the mosques has to do with their position on Israel, that I don't allow them to exploit our democratic ally in a way to demonize them, so it would not be hard for the regular media to find me if they really wanted to find Muslims that are rational and don't or use our grandmothers for political one-upsmanship.
You're so right. They stereotype Muslims, the media. They stereotype the worst stereotype of Muslims, that Omar and Tlaib, they keep calling them women of color and the first Muslims in Congress. What does that have to do with anything? You know, Zudi Jasser, you didn't ask me, but I argued that the governor of Arizona should appoint you to the Senate when John McCain passed away. I said, now there would be a great patriot. You served in the Navy. You are a Muslim. You would be the first Muslim, quote unquote, in the United States Senate, and you'd be a patriot. I don't know why the governor didn't do it. I'm not asking you to get involved in that. But isn't it interesting? Now we have here Omar and Tlaib. They are out-and-out anti-Semites. The things that they say, the quotes that you can, and it's over and over and over again. And Tlaib and her association with some supporter of Hezbollah, and the things that they have said and done, I mean, the tolerance that these 2 women receive is unbelievable.
And I can't tell you, it's the bullies in our community are able to portray themselves as victims constantly. I mean, you watch this press conference she just gave a few hours ago. It might as well have been Hamas TV, and it was mainstream television in America. American television turned into Hamas TV because Ilhan Omar was being given free rein to wax on for minutes about her perceptions of Palestine. Then even when she talked about democracy, when she used the word democracy, she put her air quotes in air as if somehow it's a fake democracy. She'll never talk that way about Turkey when she sat with Erdogan. Never talk that way about other Islamist regimes, Qatar, that she has close relationship with. No. Israel, the real democracy in the Middle East, gets air quotes about democracy while she's speaking, and then claims that because they didn't let her in, and they're both supporters of BDS, which clearly is based on destroying Israel, that somehow, and by the way, Mark, what is one of the most hypocritical things? All these folks wanted to prevent Geert Wilders from coming to the United States in 2015 because he was an Islamophobe, He's spreading hate about Muslims in Europe. He shouldn't be allowed in. And I remember Senator Kyle calling me here in Arizona saying, really, what do you think? And I said, listen, I disagree with all of his positions on on Islam, and yet I think he should have the freedom to come, and Americans should learn, and we should allow this to be part of the conversation. No religion deserves defense that can't withstand criticism of its core tenets. And yet they wanted him to be prevented from coming to the U.S., and now when Israel prevents them from coming in because they want to destroy it through the BDS movement, that somehow is inappropriate.
And Israel's surrounded. It's not like Hamas. I keep hearing this two-state solution stuff. With whom? I mean, the Palestinian Authority is said to be moderate. The Palestinian Authority uses subsidies it gets from other countries to pay pensions to terrorists. The Hamas is Hamas. We know what that is. And I hear this Talib talks about the occupation. The occupation. So here you are, you're a state, Israel. It's a country. They have their borders. They want to protect their borders, despite allegations and negotiating and all the rest of it. And you're going to invite people in. And here's another thing. Some of these areas are powder kegs. And so if, in fact, Talib and Omar are going to go there and are going to foment protests and even riots, that's something that country has to take into consideration. Anyway.
And I really don't see any difference. When you have Iranian officials screaming death to America, America as a democracy has a right to say, you know what, we don't want you coming into this country, and Secretary Pompeo was right to put sanctions on Zarif and others personally. Israel, similarly, when you have members of Congress here that support BDS, that calls explicitly, there's no endpoint to BDS, Mark. It's not like they said, we want this policy change and then we will stop our boycott. There's no endpoint. They want to see Palestine only. Their agenda for the 3-day trip was simply about Palestine. They had every radical from Hanan Ashrawi on part of their education, quote unquote, and yet they had no Israeli Knesset members, no members of any Israeli think tanks or activist community that would give them the other side of the story, like the other 80 members of Congress that were just there during the same time. No, they had their own anti-Israel approach. And Israel, very rightly so, said, you know what, we're not going to participate in our own suicide with you. Sorry.
Do you agree with me that most of the elements that you're talking about, not just the Muslim community, but on the left, that trash Israel, trash the United States? I'd say 98% of them trash both countries.
And our American public is getting an education on, when you say, why is the UN so dysfunctional? Well, it's because the far left socialists, the radical totalitarians of the left from China to Venezuela on have worked very closely with the Islamists. And what do they share in common? A despise of the West, of freedom, of NATO countries, especially America, and of Israel. And that's why over 50% of the resolutions to the UN are about Israel, the smallest democracy in the world, and yet very few of them address real human rights abuses in their own countries because the left and the Islamists are hand in hand, and we're seeing that with AOC and Tlaib and Omar. It is a clinic in what happens in the UN happening right here in Congress.
An Islamist is, how do you define that?
The Islamists are those who believe that their political activism is driven primarily by their identification with their Muslim community as one political group. So their initial identification is with their Muslim identity politically, and thus their nation state should be based on a flag based on Islam and a legal system based on the legal tradition of Islam or Sharia or Islamic law. So where Muslims are a majority. If they're a minority, they think that when they speak for all Muslims as a collective. And that's really the definition of Islamists.
Well, I don't mean to go too far, and you don't have to go with me, but isn't that at least somewhat what we're hearing from these two congresswomen?
Listen, if there's one thing I'm sure of, they're Islamists. It doesn't mean that it's anything inappropriate to say, no different than you call somebody a socialist or a communist. It's a political ideology, and there's no doubt that the lens through which Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib see politics and our foreign policy and domestic policy is one through Islamism.
One of the things that is really more than troubling, very bleak, is the way the media cover this. If they're not out of the closet celebrating these women, and not just them, but Bernie Sanders and what he says and the others about Israel, they don't know how to cover it. For instance, I just watched one host, and what she would do is play what Tlaib was saying or Omar was saying and then ask an Israeli official to respond, like they're equivalents. So the Israeli official's immediately on defense. Rather than having Tlaib and Omar on and questioning them about their past comments, about this whole ruse that took place over the last several days, in which they vote for, that they promote this pro-BDS movement. The next day they announce they're going on this trip. They avoid the trip with the other members of Congress, a bipartisan trip. They do their own trip. They have a radical group set it up, really a front group, if you will, for the most radical elements in the Palestinian movement. And then they're denied, and suddenly they have this wonderful PR going on, like it's been planned for a while, Zudi. And then after that, they go back to the Israeli official and say, she says, I want to see my grandmother, who's 90. I may never get to see her again. I promise not to boycott or protest. That's in her letter. So the Israeli official says, you know what, that's fine. Then we have another round of PR. I'm not going to surrender, who I am and my conscience to see my grandmother. The whole thing's a setup.
Completely. And, Mark, this is, you hit the nail on the head, which is, as the son of Arab immigrants, I can tell you that one of the classic trademarks of Middle Eastern Islamist politics is this tribalism. And the only way you defeat tribes is by maintaining your strength, not responding from a position of weakness, but responding in like. And when she did a letter saying that she wants to see her grandma and then she changes her mind, the response is to say, oh, so you exploited your constituency on the letterhead of the U.S. Congress letterhead and said you wanted to see your grandmother, and now you're saying that because the global Palestinian movement got upset with you and you're afraid of that movement bringing pressure of the BDS activists all over the world from Qatar to Turkey upon your office, now you're acquiescing to them and not responding to your own constituents in Dearborn or in Minneapolis. So which is it? Who is your constituency? Is it Qatar and Turkey, or your grandma, your family, and your constituents in the United States? I mean, that's the way they need to be responded to, but nobody either has the guts, and they're basically letting these activists with huge social media platforms, who, by the way, the left not only insults us Muslims, but 98% of Americans watch that press conference and are just getting ill. There's no way Americans support what they're talking about.
And now, by the way, Rashida Tlaib has a fundraising letter out based on this. And so she says the Israeli government ultimately would only let me come in if I surrendered my viewpoints and so forth. It's inhumane. So now she's fundraising off this. I mean, the whole thing is transparent, yet the media treat this as if it's sudden, and not just the media. The Democrat Party has circled the wagons around these two women. Does that not frighten you?
I think the only thing that doesn't frighten me is that eventually I have faith in the American people, that as they begin to realize that these are not aberrations, that these are the actual leadership of the Islamist organizations that dominate many of the mosques and Islamic organizations, they're going to realize that it's time for regular Muslims to wake up and begin to create new organizations that are pro-American, pro-Israel, pro-Western freedom, anti-Islamist, anti-Hamas, and no longer pandering to the radical left in this red-green axis of the left and the Islamists. And, I can tell you, her grandmother was interviewed on Palestinian television, and she said in Arabic, "Yakhrub Beito," and she's talking about Trump, and she basically said, President Trump, may his house be destroyed. That's what she said in Arabic. The media ignored it. It's not being covered. So here you have a sitting congresswoman's grandmother cursing our president in Middle Eastern media, and nobody's really responding to it. And I think eventually America's going to get fed up with it and begin to, I think, create a climate in which Muslims will finally need to wake up from their anesthesia.
I hope you're right. I'm a little more sober about this, I think, with respect to the Democrat Party, where this ideology seems to have taken hold and is expanding, in my view. Zuhdi, I want to thank you very, very much. Your group's called Islamic Forum for Democracy. If people want to learn more, where do they go?
AIFdemocracy.org, AIFdemocracy.org, and look up our Muslim reform movement. There are many Muslim reformers like myself, not only on the right, like me, but on the left, that are very active, that are not Islamist and reject all of this nonsense.
God bless you, my friend. Much appreciated, and be safe. And I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.